Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome into this Sunday morning with the Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever your faith tradition, whomever you love, you are welcome here. My name is Susan Pratt, and I'm a member of QUF. I'd like to begin this service by acknowledging that the waterland and shorelands in our area are the traditional territory of the Sklallam and Shimmikan people. We honor and acknowledge our indigenous members and neighbors and promise to do our best to maintain their homelands. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please make sure your cell phone is silenced so as not to interrupt our time together. Thank you. And now, as we call our time together, let us settle our minds and calm our hearts with the ringing of our chime. It's good to be together. Now I'd like to welcome Pat and Doug Rodgers. Where are you? There you are. Oh, there you are. Who will lead us in our call to community, hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit. Please rise, either in body or spirit, and
Spirit harvest the power, our separate fires will kindle one flame. Witness the mystery of each hour, our trials in this light appear all the same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirit of heart and mind, seeds for the sowing are laid in store, nurtured in love and conscience refined, in body and spirit united once more. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit growing in all, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun, winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of life resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again.
Thank you, Pat and Doug. Please join me now in our chalice lighting words, which were written by Nita Penfold. No matter what they tell you, let it be about joy. Let it be about the sacred, self-surviving, no, thriving, shining its way to the knowledge within. Let it be about blooming, the unfolding of the universe through you, because the story of you begins 15 billion years ago with that first flash of being. Our opening words are by Jan Richardson from her book In the Sanctuary of Women. True art, good art, authentic art arises from the depths of one's self. It emerges from the dark, mysterious, and sometimes chaotic interior waters, the place where the spirit hovers and broods over the formless void, as it did at the beginning of creation. And now our responsive reading comes from Lisa Friedman. We touch the floor. Remember that whatever we bring our best self is holy ground. We reach for the sky. Very bigger than ourselves. We hold hands to remember that we need one another and are part of one human family. We join voices to remember that we each have a gift to offer the world and to use in making the world a better place. I'd now like to welcome forward Bo Olgren, the Director of Family Ministry.
Good early morning, everyone. Today in our RE classes and our littlest class, we are going to be exploring the world of water. In our middle elementary class, we are continuing our unit on Buddhism and exploring the Eightfold Path. And then in our middle school class, we are finishing up our unit on Islam in preparation for our visit to the Idris Mosque next week in Seattle. So those of you on the aisle, if you will please form an arch, we are going to sing out the children.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Thank you, Bo. Now we would like to welcome those of you who are visiting us this morning. If you are online, please say hello in the chat section and tell us your name and where you're from. The chat section can be found below or on the right-hand side of the video when it is out of full screen mode. If you're here in person, please rise if you would like, or raise your hand so that we may welcome you. Welcome everyone. Welcome. We're glad you're with us today. You can stay afterwards a little bit if you'd like and join us for a coffee and getting to know you a little bit better. We will now receive our offering, which today goes to A Farm for Annie and will be presented by QUUF member Polly Thurston, who is also a volunteer at the farm. Polly?
Sorry. Hi. Yes, I'm Polly Thurston. I'm a member here, and I work at A Farm for Annie. A Farm for Annie is a nonprofit organization that's primary mission is to provide a forever home for horses that have been career horses for the most part. Unfortunately, humans have a tendency to throw away horses. when they're no longer useful for human use. Kathy Person, the founder of A Farm for Annie, said this to me the other day. She said, "People throw away and get a new horse when they are broken, especially when they have been trained for a career, jumping, racing, barrel racing, pulling a cart, roping, gaming. There's all sorts of careers for horses. And quite often, horses have injuries from these careers, which is the sad part. There are other rescue animals at A Farm for Annie as well. There's a couple donkeys who were abandoned. There's ducks and chickens. I'm not sure of their story, but one of my favorite, I'll tell you about a couple of my favorite animals. Alex actually is the youngest horse on the farm. Most of the horses are older horses. Alex came to Center Valley Animal Rescue probably about 10 or 11 years ago as a foal with his mom and 21 or 22 other horses. And it wasn't on purpose that they were malnourished and not being taken care of, but it was a situation where it was a breeding operation and the owner was getting dementia and wasn't able to care for them anymore. So Alex was rehomed at A Farm for Annie as he got a little bit older. The thing I love about Alex is he's so curious and he's a total pest. When I'm fixing fences or something in his pasture, he'll come up and he'll nudge me and he'll bump me, and he's just a total goofball. He loves to be curious and be around people and check out what's happening. Another one of my favorite horses is Shane. He is a sweet, kind, loving horse. He's the horse that will come and greet all the other horses that come to the farm. If it's a female, often he'll be companion with them, and he'll just kind of gently bring them into the fold. He's just a total sweetheart. He also was a horse that worked with children. His career was, he was a jumper, and I think my understanding is they'd put a kid on him and maybe dress him up, and then he'd jump with them, and they'd take pictures of, with the kid, and he has, because of that, he has hip problems. Let's see, I should tell you about Annie too. She was the first one before it was A Farm for Annie. She was totally emaciated when they got her. And they got her and realized that animals are not treated well after, they're no longer useful to humans. And thus A Farm for Annie started, and therefore the name. She's no longer alive. She was a beautiful show horse. Big, if you go on the website, you'll see a picture of her, a big, beautiful black horse. And she, as I say, she was totally emaciated, but they brought her back. She lived to be about 30 years old, so she had a good retirement life. What I love about A Farm for Annie is just understanding these different characters and getting to know them. And there's just a tremendous sense of love and respect and mutuality that is part of it. In the past, there have been various activities like working with children and people with special needs, but that all ended at when COVID started, unfortunately. So if you go on the website, you'll see some of that there. So thank you for donating to A Farm for Annie. Of course, all the donations go directly to caring for the animals. And of course, there are a lot of expenses taking care of horses, a lot of horses. There's food and supplements, which are totally individualized because they're older animals and they need different diets. There's vet bills and medication, there's horse blankets, that's one I didn't know about. They don't last real long, a few years, you know. And as in older humans, we like to be warm, so do horses, and they need blankets during the winter. Yeah, there's just lots of other expenses too. They rent the farm, there's other things that they have to pay for. So just lastly, I'll emphasize that the place is a consistency of love and kindness, and I admire the dedication that these beautiful beings are offered a very special home to live out the last of their years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Polly. Sounds wonderful. I have been by this farm, but I never really understood what it was, so now I know. If you would like to donate to this worthwhile cause, there are several options. If you're here in person, the ushers will now come around to receive the offering. Or if you are attending the service online, you can text the amount you'd like to give to the bottom, to the number now showing on the bottom of the screen, or go to quuf.org, click on Giving, or else just mail a check to QUF. Remember to write "A Farm for Annie" on the memo line. We will now gratefully receive your offering as we listen to Pachelbel's Canon in a medley for flute and banjo played by Chris and Terry Copeland.
Falling in love with
Thank you, Chris and Terry. That was lovely. It's so good to be with you today. I want to begin our announcements time by sharing that this will be my last Sunday preaching at QUUF this congregational year. I am so deeply grateful for the welcome that I've received and for the opportunity to preach and connect with all of you in this lovely congregation. And now I'd like to welcome a member of the Healthy Community team.
Thank you, Melody. I'm Karen Wamstead, a member of the Healthy Community Team, HCT, you may have heard of that. And once again, we're going to have a conversation circle right here in the front of the sanctuary. It'll start around 11:15 or so, goes for about an hour. And this is the perfect opportunity. If you are an introvert and you fear going into coffee hour, you just go into the coffee hour, you get your coffee, that's what you're there for. And you can come here and you can respond to a question. We'll provide a topic. That's easy for you. And then you'll have this lovely frog to pass around. Sandy Tweed loves this frog. Yes. Okay. And so we'll start around 11:15 or so and come around through the coffee hour with this bell. That tells you it's time to begin. Look forward to seeing you.
Is there a tiny Finnegan in the room? Tiny! Oh, there she is. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. It's me again, Tiny Finnegan. It's an honor being your pledge ambassador this year, but I have to admit it's a little nerve-wracking. I've never been a pledge ambassador before, and I'll go ahead and admit it, I'm a little wet behind the ears. I'm wondering, are these announcements enough? Should I have a podcast? Or would it seem like I was just spouting off? But let me give you some positive pledge updates now. I hope you have the Pledge Brunchapalooza on your calendar, April 2nd at 11 a.m., right after the Sunday service. Feasting and frolicking with friends, and some surprises too. On Tuesday night, at the fabulous State of the Fellowship meeting, one of the messages that came through repeatedly was that we need to be together. We need to have fun together, and we need to socialize. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Exactly. The Brunchapalooza on Sunday, April 2nd at 11 is an excellent time to be together, to have fun together, and to socialize. Haven't been to QUF for an event for a while? I invite you to wade in. We have a Brunchapalooza volunteer bulletin board by the office. It started with 68 tasks, and now there are only 24 tasks left to be filled. Thank you to those who have signed up. And if you can help, please sign up on the board or contact Robin Steeman or Peg Hunter. In reality, volunteers have already been hard at work, as you can see. Gorgeous, colorful flags have been hung in the fellowship hall, brightening things up for pledge season. As you can see, I even got in on the fun. Above the pledge bulletin board, you will see the magnificent 6-foot orca inspired by Article 2 that some of the youth created for us. Make sure you check it out. At the State of the Fellowship, we met in small groups. And to the question of, what can I do to create a more unified, diverse, equitable, and inclusive QUUF, one person said, I am going to love it. I am giving my heart, my time, and my money to support this community. It takes every one of us to love it with our time and our financial support, if we want to be here for all of us in the future. This year, we are reimagining QUUF. Let's love and support QUUF with our time, talents, and financial support and meet our pledge goal. And never forget, where there's a whale, there's a way. Say it with me. Where there's a whale, there's a way. After the service today, I will be part of the team passing out pledge packets in the foyer. We'll mail the rest out soon. Wait till you see the gorgeous brochure filled with important information and heartfelt testimonials. Your pledge form is in the packet. As always, your pledge is confidential and recorded by the bookkeeper. Our goal is to get all the pledge cards turned in at the Brunchapalooza on April 2nd at 11 a.m. right after the service or before. Thank you. And now Julia Cochran is unable to be with us this morning, but Susan Pratt will be reading Julia's testimonial. Susan.
Thank you, Tiny. You speak very well for somebody that's not exactly a human. It's impressive. Julia Cochran wrote this lovely description of what QUF means to her. Unfortunately, she's sorry that you're not feeling well, Julia. If you're listening, I hope that I say things the way that you meant to be them. Anyway, she says, my name is Julia Cochran, and I have been a member of QUF for over 25 years. QUF is my second home, and it is more secure and stable than the home that I sleep in. It is the place I go for solace and nourishment. I cherish QUF, and as such, I work to nurture all that QUF is. One of the ways I nurture QUF is by being involved with many of her parts. I have been involved with teams on every council, and I use my skills to further their work. I have taken notes of meetings, washed dishes at many events, cashiered or entered data for other events, cleaned floors, bathrooms, RE, and the kitchen. All of these activities are how I show my appreciation for the mission, people, and facilities of QUF. I also pledge money as well as my time. So, what are the benefits I reap from this involvement, she says. As a parent, it was the place I trusted the spiritual development of my child and other children in my life. I know that my daughter was not being indoctrinated and told to either believe in something or she would be damned. I also trusted that being raised a Unitarian Universalist would inoculate her from the lure of easy answers and cults. As an activist, QUF provided allies, space, and resources. QUF incubated the original local pride, the Port Townsend Peace Movement, the Poetic Justice Theater, and gave meeting space to Amnesty International, Occupy, Jefferson AIDS Services, and many other groups that have enriched my life. The shelter program at the American Legion was started on the floor of our sanctuary, now the Fellowship Hall, in conjunction with 3 other congregations. We used a UUA grant to rehab one of the Haynes Street cottages. We built a tiny home that is still inhabited by a low-income individual. Within QUF, we have developed groups that have changed the landscape of our community, such as Native Connections with the Chetzemoka Trail, and the Chimicum We Are Still Here project, and Green Sanctuary with meaningful movies. And as a member of QUF, I joined other faith traditions to create the Jefferson Interfaith Action Coalition, which is the organization that founded and grew into the Winter Welcoming Center. Spiritually, I have been nourished by the diversity of Sunday services over the years. our various ministers, our youth, guest speakers like Joseph, and of course the broad range of lay speakers we have during the summer months. Over the years, I have learned what it means to be a humanist through my involvement with AHA. I have also found a Buddhist practice here that allowed me to relax enough to trust my fellow practitioners and to grow in the silence. I loved for many years with Quakers. I have also been nourished spiritually by the art and music that QUF brings into my life on a weekly basis. Intellectually, I have grown in skills and knowledge from ALPS classes and book groups and thousands of hours of conversation with people from all sorts of backgrounds. Life without QUF would have been so much narrower and boring. So for all these reasons and many more, I prioritize my contributions to QUF above all other organizations that I am involved with. This is the foundation that the rest of my life is built on. This is what makes my other community involvements possible. And this is why I pledge a meaningful chunk of my income to QUF. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Tiny, Julia, and Susan. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. And thus we place this first stone, thinking of the women of our world as we just celebrated International Women's Day. We hold in strength all the women who are struggling over abortion rights and bodily autonomy. And now, within the congregation, we light a candle for Barbara and Carl Allen, who celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary on Friday. Many blessings to you, and may your joy continue. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I've just shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed but of no less importance. I invite you now into a moment of silence. Our reading today comes from the Reverend Jan Richardson, a Methodist minister, visual artist, and writer who inspires me in her life of creativity. She writes, "There are spiritual practices that give me a framework for understanding and engaging my creative life. For instance, I've come to think of my creative work as an ongoing process of lectio divina, a Greek term for sacred reading. Lectio divina is an ancient way of praying with sacred texts, not only the Bible, but any sacred texts, which includes the text of our own lives. Making art gives me a way to reflect on my life, to read and interpret the stories and experiences that are inscribed on my soul. Art making is a way to crawl into the text, to explore and ponder it from the inside, and to make my own contribution to the telling of the story. Creating art is itself a form of spiritual practice. Spiritual practice, whether or not it involves physical creating, invites us to work on everything that comes up in our journey. Spiritual practices remind us of the value and necessity of giving ourselves to the daily habits that deepen our souls. Bursts of inspiration and leaps in our artistic work usually rest on the bedrock of routines that we've developed. Those routines may sometimes be mind-numbingly boring, but they're what help us show up and make ourselves available to the creative spirit. The mundane and the miraculous are intimately intertwined. Our special music today is Amani Utupe, Swahili for Grant Us Peace, Give Us Courage. It's performed by the Vaccinated Voices, conducted by Pat. Today's story begins with fibercraft. In 2018, one of my family members received a devastating medical diagnosis. It was a chaotic and overwhelming time, and my mind and spirit felt scrambled and ungrounded. And after the news of this diagnosis, I was surprised to feel within me a call to fibercraft. The call seemed to arise in my body, unprompted and unexpected. It had been 7 years since I last picked up knitting needles, and suddenly my hands ached, longing for the feel of yarn and needles. My fingertips wanted to touch wool, to touch stockinette stitch and ribbing, to walk down the aisle of a yarn store and touch every skein. And so that's what I did. I went to my local yarn store and I told them about my situation. I told them that I needed a soft, comforting skein of yarn and a simple pattern that I could take with me on an airplane. And they found me a pattern, bamboo needles, and soft, fluffy yarn in a soothing color. They told me, too, that I wasn't alone in my longing for fibercraft after hearing bad news. Their shop was near to Seattle Children's Hospital, and they said that distraught parents often seemed to arrive there as though sleepwalking, feeling scrambled by grief, anxiety, and uncertainty, needing the grounding of soft wool and a simple pattern, stockinette stitch and ribbing. My knitting accompanied me through chaos and grief and overwhelm, air travel, hard conversations. And the yarn really did help me to feel grounded again, to help my mind and spirit feel less scrambled, more orderly, and able to move forward stitch after stitch and row after row. In my early 20s, I worked at an agricultural intentional community called Camp Hill Village, Kimberton Hills. We used organic farming and traditional crafts as a form of therapy for people with developmental disabilities. I was assigned to the fiber arts studio. On a few occasions, I got to see the process of yarn getting made from start to finish. People with different interests and skills got to help with different stages of the process. Stages like cleaning and combing the wool, preparing it for spinning, and spinning the yarn with a drop spindle or a spinning wheel. And finally, of course, knitting and finishing pieces that we could sell in our craft studio. The repetitive actions of each step were often grounding and soothing. I was very surprised the first time that I saw a raw sheep's fleece because it was covered in dirt and brambles and it smelled like a farm. And to turn that into soft, lovely wool, soft, lovely yarn requires a lot of steps and a lot of washing. Different aspects of fibercraft worked for different people. An activity that one person loved could be boring or way too complex for someone else. I discovered that I loved using a spinning wheel. It absorbed my attention and brought me into a state of mindfulness much more quickly and deeply than any meditation technique I'd tried before. However, as with meditation, it was easy to drop into mindfulness when the spinning wheel was running smoothly. But when it wasn't, it was the most frustrating activity on earth. This next image is called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. It comes from the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. And I like this image because it shows the diversity of spiritual practices available to us. And I know that the text is small, but I'm going to walk through some of what it shows. Contemplative practices are represented using the metaphor of a tree. And there are two large roots of that tree, one labeled awareness and one labeled communion and connection. According to the Center for Contemplative Mind, these roots symbolize, quote, two intentions that are the foundation of all contemplative practices. One, cultivating awareness, and two, developing a stronger connection to God, the divine, or inner wisdom. There are many branches on the tree which represent different categories of contemplative practice. Individual practices are like leaves found at the tip of every limb and every twig. The categories of practices are labeled stillness, generative, creative, active, relational, movement, and cyclical ritual. The generative and creative practices speak the most to me of spiritual practices rooted in creativity. In addition to the well-known spiritual practices of meditation, yoga, pilgrimage, and gratitude, the tree includes practices like contemplative arts, improvisation, storytelling, activism, singing, and dance. There are so many spiritual practices that could be included on the tree, and even the most secular activity can be contemplative so long as it's engaged with awareness and intention to connect with inner wisdom or that which is greater than ourselves. My brother is a visual artist. A few years ago, he took me to a life drawing class he was teaching at a museum. For a couple hours, my brother and I gathered with a group of people around a model who struck different poses, sometimes standing, sometimes sitting on a chair, sometimes lying on the ground. And most of us drew that model with charcoal on big sheets of newsprint. My brother's drawings were detailed and expressive. One of his former art professors showed up and depicted the model using oil paints. It was exciting and a bit scary to make the bold lines made possible by the charcoal medium and to smudge it with my fingers. The life drawing class was an exercise for me in attention, in trying to really see someone and represent them on paper, all from our unique vantage points around the room, to capture their pose and their expressiveness. I really struggled to get the model's proportions right, and I struggled to capture the unique way they showed up in space and time, to depict their thisness in space. The theologian Walter Burghardt describes contemplation as taking a long, loving look at the real. Creativity often requires a kind of mindfulness. When drawing from a picture, you study that image deeply. And in drawing from life, you inevitably offer life a long look at the real. And if you're lucky, this gaze will be loving. Creativity as a spiritual practice can evoke wonder and awe. I spoke recently with my mother, who has worked as a bench goldsmith throughout her life. And I asked her if she had any thoughts to share on creativity. She responded to me that creativity is amazing. She said, to be able to think of something new in your mind and be able to create it in reality, cats and dogs can't do that. And there's something uniquely human and uniquely awe-inspiring about artistic creativity. Some interpret the passage in Genesis, where God creates humankind in their image, as an argument that humans are designed to create, that creativity is something that we're uniquely called to do. Spiritual practices have a reputation for being serious, disciplined, and orderly. Think of seated meditation with a timer and ramrod straight posture. Or think of prayers that must be repeated exactly word for word, like the Apostles' Creed or the Our Fathers and Holy Marys of the Catholic Rosary. This reputation for seriousness can make spiritual practices feel intimidating. But there are as many spiritual practices as there are leaves on a tree. I believe that creativity and spiritual practice offers a different kind of spiritual engagement. Creativity as spiritual practice can be a site of play, of risk, of meaning-making, and surprise. I mentioned risk because so many people would rather meditate with perfect posture rather than risk trying something new, trying a new form of art and potentially looking foolish. And part of my own spiritual journey has involved learning to risk in this way, learning that it's better to reconnect with playfulness than submit to the demands of perfectionism. My colleague Bridget Laughlin is a UU religious educator, ministerial candidate, and comedian. And I've been really inspired by a class that she's taught, which is called Improv as Spiritual Practice. This is a great place to challenge perfectionism. The class teaches participants how to do improv, and it also offers reflection on the spiritual dimensions of improv. For example, in improv, people famously say yes and. They commit in improv to always positively affirm and build upon the work of their teammates. I took up pottery several years ago and found it was a great way to challenge my own perfectionism. There are many lessons that I learned in pottery. First, pottery is really messy. The clay gets everywhere, all over your arms, all over your clothes, all over your shoes. And as a novice potter, you try really hard to make a bowl that looks a certain way, but the bowl deviates from your plan. And you might end up with a cup or a tray or a heap of unusable clay. In pottery, I learned that you can't overwork something, that continuing to tweak and refine and change your creation might make it fall apart. And I learned that centering is actually really hard. Centering is a step you take to prepare your clay for being thrown on the wheel. You need to move all of the clay to the center of the wheel and make it balanced and symmetrical enough that you can shape it. Centering begins by slamming your clay onto the wheel. And while the wheel is spinning, you move the clay to the center with a surprising amount of force. I usually had to press the weight of my body against the clay to move it to the center properly. And I want to keep this effortfulness in mind as a facilitator who often invites people to spiritually center themselves. Saying things like, take a moment to center your body, or center yourself with a few mindful breaths. And sometimes centering can take a lot more work and a lot more time than a few breaths or a few moments. There's an element of grace and gambling with ceramics, at least for me as an amateur potter. I know advanced potters have a lot more skills than I do for glazing and firing and working with clay. But for me, I can't know what I'll end up making. Painting pieces with glaze and then heating them in the kiln feels the most like gambling. This is the process of finishing the pieces, adding colorful, shiny glaze to the outside and making the piece hard and durable enough for daily use. When you're painting it on, the glaze is a pale pastel color. It looks nothing like it will on the finished piece. And as it's heated thousands of degrees, your precious mug might end up breathtaking or just broken. Creativity can be a site of meaning-making and sometimes even divination. On the screen are 3 different collages that I've made over several years using the soul collage method. Soul collage is an artistic process which can help people clarify, discern, and make deeper meaning of their lives. Participants create cards for themselves of personally meaningful symbols. The genius of soul collage is in its simplicity. People are often less intimidated by collaging in contrast to other forms of art. It's less scary if you create art from other images. To make a soul collage card, a participant begins by making an intention. by asking a question or stating a desire for clarity or help with something. Next, the participant comes to a table covered in images cut out from magazines, and the participant looks over the images and, with as little inner critique as possible, picks up the images that feel the most charged, alive, or engaging. And then participants arrange the images in a way that feels pleasing to them on a 5 by 8 inch card. This activity is supposed to flow intuitively, rather than have participants try to make something beautiful or appealing to others. And finally, the participant reflects on what they have made. The reflection step of soul collage feels the most like discovering buried treasure. The images that speak to us and that we intuitively arrange together often have a lot to say about what's alive for us. The participant reflects on what they made, discerning what wisdom the card has to offer. Over time, participants can create whole decks of soul collage cards, which is creating their own hyper-personal tarot deck or oracle deck. During a moment of uncertainty, they might pull a card from the deck and call upon their collection of personally relevant symbols to shed new light on a situation in their lives. Ultimately, creativity can be a portal to playfulness, a way to reconnect with the inner child. Creativity can train us to try different things, to see something in a new way, and to experience surprise. But play also feels vulnerable and scary. The comic artist Linda Barry reflects on her experience asking college students to draw a car and then draw a picture of Batman. And she writes, "There's something beautiful in the lines made by people who stopped drawing a long time ago. And there's something curious about how scared they are when I ask them to draw a car for 2 minutes." She invites them to draw a car, quote, "even if you don't know how, just to see what happens." The students usually project horror at her suggestion and act as though they're being forced on a terrifying carnival ride. She writes, quote, "all we did was draw a car, but the room feels like it's on fire." And yet, Barry reflects that these lines made by people who stopped drawing ago, pictures that look amateur, contain a kind of aliveness that can't be faked. An aliveness that leaves an artist once they're taught to draw something in the right way. An aliveness that some artists spend their whole lives trying to get back. A beautiful thing about young children is that they love creating things. They love drawing and painting and making things out of pipe cleaners. And they usually don't care if their art is good. But then, at a certain point, children become self-conscious. They worry about whether their art is good or not. And they decide that if they're not good, they need to stop drawing and to stop making things. Creativity can help us reconnect with that inner child. Reconnect with that inner child who loves to draw and who loves to sculpt things out of Play-Doh. Humans were made to make things, made to be creative, and engaging creativity as a spiritual practice can reconnect us with that birthright. May it be so, and blessed be. Our closing song is hymn number 1024, When the Spirit Says Do. Please rise as you're willing and able.
Got to do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you've got to do. Oh Lord, you've got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Make. Got to make when the Spirit says make. You've got to make when the Spirit says make. When the Spirit says make, you got to make. Oh Lord, you've got to make when the Spirit says make. 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 Sing. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you've got to sing. Oh Lord, you've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 Rest. You've got to rest when the Spirit says rest. You've got to rest when the Spirit says rest. When the Spirit says rest, you've got to rest, oh Lord. You've got to rest when the Spirit says rest. 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 Do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you got to do, oh Lord. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Yeah.
Please join in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Next week, Kate Kinney will be speaking on the topic of holy wells, thin places, and the goddess Bridget. We hope you can join us. Our postlude today is the quintessentially creative one bottle of pop in 3 layers. Join in and follow the leaders as you like.
Before we sing, I want to just thank you, Melody, for everything that you've done for us in the past months. And we hope everything is good for you in the future. Thank you.
So the song is in 3 parts. And when the words appear, we will teach it to you. We're going to divide off that way, and that way. And it's first we're going to sing all 3 songs, and then we will go into, I'll take that part, Doug will take the middle part, and Chris will take that part over there. And it sounds like this.
Soon. Equipment failure here.
There, that's the note we start. 1
Bottle of pop, 2 bottle of pop, 3 bottle of pop, 4 bottle of pop, 5 bottle of pop, 6 bottle of pop, 7 bottle of pop, pop. Don't throw your trash in my backyard, my backyard, my backyard. Don't throw your trash in my backyard, my backyard's full. Fish and chips and vinegar, vinegar, vinegar. Fish and chips and vinegar, pepper, 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 salt.
1 bottle of pop, 2 bottle of pop, 3 bottle of pop, 4 bottle of pop, 5 bottle of pop, 6 bottle of pop, 7 bottle of pop, pop.
1 bottle of pop, 2 bottle of pop, 3 bottle of pop, 4 bottle of pop, 5 bottle of pop, 6 bottle of pop, 7 bottle of pop, pop.
1 bottle of pop, 2 bottle of pop, 3 bottle of pop, 4 bottle of pop, 5 bottle of pop, 6 bottle of pop, 7 bottle of pop, pop. Don't throw your trash in my backyard, my backyard, my backyard. Don't throw your trash in my backyard, my backyard's full. Fish and chips and vinegar, vinegar, vinegar. Fish and chips and vinegar, pepper, 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 salt. 1 bottle of pop, 2 bottle of pop, 3 bottle of pop, 4 bottle of pop, 5 bottle of pop, 6 bottle of pop, 7 bottle of pop, pop.